Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and today my guest is Kristin Raworth. Hi, Kristin.
Hi.
Hi, welcome to the podcast, and it's nice to see you.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited about this conversation. So before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important for me to share my personal commitment to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence and oppression against Indigenous peoples. The land where I live, work, and record from is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. And for those of you who don't know Kristin, which if you're listening in Alberta, I would imagine that you do. And so Kristin is, I'd say, first and foremost, a victim advocate, but you're also an uber political person.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that's accurate?
I would say that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
I would say maybe a Twitter influencer.
I mean, I took a cab from the vet the other day, and my cab driver was like, "Are you on Twitter? I follow you on Twitter." And I was
really?
Like, oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess, a little bit. Yeah, it's a little weird, but yeah, like D-level Edmonton famous, I guess.
D-level Edmonton famous. I mean, if that's not a line that belongs in your Twitter bio, I think
I'll put it in my dating profile if I ever.
There you go.
Dating, yeah.
There you go. And our conversation today, just as a content warning, will dive into and talk about sexual assault and sexual misconduct. So a disclosure or a content warning there. But I reached out to you, was it even yesterday or the day before? I can't remember now.
Before, yeah.
Oh, it's a blur. Because you published an interesting article on The Line, which is a Substack publishing place. I'm not really, how do you describe Substack?
Yeah, it's like an online purveyor of ideas, I guess.
Ooh, there we go. Okay.
There you go.
Well, how would you summarize the article? Why am I doing it? I think you should.
So basically it was part of a Christmas or sort of post-Christmas rollout from The Line, which was to talk about outstanding issues. So quote unquote, the naughty list in terms of outstanding concerns that are going on in Canada. Mine was specifically about the issues related to sexual assault in institutions and the lack of action by the current Liberal government, specifically as it relates to sexual assault within athletic organizations and the military.
Yes. And so when I saw that you had put it out, and then I saw other people commenting and saying, how valuable your article was. And obviously sexual misconduct in the military is, to your point, they're both ongoing issues. And the Hockey Canada one just seems to go and go and go and go and go. And I'm not even sure if Canada is still currently playing at the World Juniors. I think it happens like Christmas Day or something, but as a non-hockey person, but interested in the political and obviously everything else that's going on with it. There's a cloud over Hockey Canada's head and over any event that they're involved in. But you start off the article talking about, the hashtag Me Too and, kind of as in the introduction of it. And I wanted to ask you, what did the hashtag Me Too mean to you?
For me, so for context, about probably, I guess, 6 months-ish previous to the hashtag coming out, I was the spokesperson for the government of Alberta's I Believe You campaign, talking about my experience with sexual assault and in coordination with the Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Centers. And I was very proud to be part of that campaign. And I was very vocal about, what happened to me and my experience with not being believed by my friends and members of my family after I was sexually assaulted by a close friend. So to see that hashtag kind of come to life and seeing I'm sure you had the same experience in my Twitter feed, my Facebook feed, it was nothing but people posting either just the hashtag or talking about their own experiences, whether it was just sort of issues around harassment, ranging up into sexual assault. So it felt like this moment of people finally seeing us and seeing all of us and our experiences and giving that experience weight. And really for the first time, people saying, and I heard it from guys in my life, think like, I didn't realize it was this much of an issue. I didn't know that it happened this much. I didn't realize. And so I think a lot of us felt like at the time it was going to be this big shift and change. And initially it felt like that. And then it just kind of turned into, the Time's Up thing, which all sort of the Hollywood actresses all were doing that. And where did that go? Like what happened with that? Nothing. And a significant amount of this stuff just kind of stopped at being performative tweets and not anything substantive.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think I remember sharing one example of something that happened to me. But I mean, like, I think most women with anyone who identifies as female, I mean, we don't just have one instance, right? It's usually many instances. And I remember, that anyone can think that like, wow, I can't, and that's common. I can't believe this is such a big issue. It's like, yes, it's actually a really big issue. Big is actually an understatement. And there's in every institution, there is some kind of a Me Too thing. Movement isn't the right word, but do you know what I mean? There's a Me Too to every institution.
And the problem is that that term even in and of itself got weaponized because the right used it as a term of like, oh, they're going to Me Too you, right? Mm-hmm. And this concept of accountability for people who have done something wrong was quickly deemed cancel culture, which is hilarious because if you look at people ranging from Bill Cosby to Louis C.K. to all these different people who have either been convicted of or admitted to acts of sexual harassment and sexual assault. But Bill Cosby's going on tour next year.
I know, I just saw that.
And so they're like to use that weaponization and say that women want to ruin men's lives. Like there are very few examples of men who have been outed as sexual predators who actually faced significant consequences for their behavior. Harvey Weinstein, the reason for the Me Too movement in the beginning, yes, he's in jail and he has faced consequences, but that is not the norm in terms of how that has gone. And so I find that the other problem with it is we had this moment where we could have had these conversations, but instead it's become weaponized by people on the right and men's rights activists and all these other people to say it's about canceling people. And I'm sorry, but if you've committed sexual assault or sexual harassment, we're not canceling you. We're calling you to account for your actions. And that is has become a really big cultural touchstone in terms of the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, there are so many Me Too conversations in different institutions that haven't even been had yet.
Yeah.
Politics really being one, for example, at the top of my mind.
Yeah.
That, and that defies, I mean, that speaks to the level of, and I say by I mean anyone who has worked in politics and understands or has been, either who has been a victim or in any way, how good we are at maintaining the level of silence and secrecy 100%. To protect people who I don't really know why. Yeah. But,
I mean, I'm sure that, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I don't know any woman who's worked in politics as a staffer who doesn't have a story. And, you know, a lot of times it still is that whispered network of watch out for this guy, don't be alone with that guy, don't drink with this guy. And in, you know, it's almost 2023, and we still operate that way, like in like secret DMs of like, you know, if you're with this dude, be careful, because it is still not an environment that is safe for women to come forward around these issues, because our careers would be damaged, not theirs.
well, and in every instance, going back to your article, so the military and sports, we see how this plays out publicly. The women and the people who come forward are always the people who end up bearing the consequences of this. And if there's any kind of, you know, justice in a very unjust system, you know, the perpetrators are accountable in some kind of way, but so often it's the women who face the real consequences in terms of jobs, social, you know, like it can be extremely, not just the event itself, but, you know, it can be a lifelong impact, in terms of, you know, how much, where you work and what job opportunities you have.
Well, and in the article, one of the things that I talk about, especially towards the end, is, you know, there's a lot of unpaid emotional labor that survivors do, and whether it is survivors of sexual assault within the military or in sporting organizations who are coming forward and testifying to their experiences or tweeting or whatever they're doing. And that unpaid emotional labor is constant because nothing is being done. And there is so much demanded of people who have been through trauma to sort of rip themselves open to prove that this is an issue again and again and again without meaningful action on behalf of them. So they have to keep doing it to try to bring attention to the issues that matter to them and what's happened to them.
Well, and I mean, that's really interesting. And you also talk about it in the article about, you know, this is a government led by Justin Trudeau, who he labels himself a feminist, and he labels his government a feminist government. And, you know, it's one of my frustrations that I don't necessarily feel that, that I see what that means, other than it being used as a label, as a talking point, because of instances like this. And I understand that things are more complicated and that sometimes things require more time than I would like. But, you know, there's seemingly no challenge of him calling himself that and in proving it. So what to you is the difference between when a government talks about the idea of doing something versus actually doing something related to being a feminist government?
So I think that one of the biggest issues that I've always had with the Liberal government is that they say a lot of really nice things, but they don't do them. And when it comes to violence against women, they have had action plan after action plan, inquiry, this, da, 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 da. But in terms of actual concrete action, that has been a really big issue and sticking point for me. And even provincially in Alberta, where you and I both live, the NDP, when they came into power, they definitely wanted to put money and attention onto some of these issues. But instead of working with the organizations that were already kind of doing the work, so the sexual assault centers, that's an example, that were already kind of doing it, it's always about funding the new shiny thing. Being a feminist government means working with the experts and the people in the field who have done this work forever and ever and ever. And one of the frustrations I hear from the sexual assault centers all the time, and the NDP, the UCP, whatever government it is the fact that they have a model that works that doesn't get funded because it's not some fancy, shiny announcement that you can make on the news. And I think that the Liberal government is also responsible for that, in that they want to always do something new and exciting. Like the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls inquiry had very concrete actions in terms of accountability from the RCMP and from police organizations. That has not been done in terms of actually going into these cold cases and putting money and resources And we know that that can be done because we've seen, I think it was last year, like 6 months ago in Toronto, they solved like a 35-year-old murder case from 23andMe. Like they, if you put the resources into these things, it can be done, but they haven't done that. They've just said, oh, we accept the recommendations. And of course we believe in this and this and that, but they don't do anything. And I think that's where we need to sort of demand better from our government. And this is just me a little bit on my, high horse a little bit, because I was saying to someone the other day, like every time that I have that conversation with a Liberal supporter, they say, okay, well, what about childcare? They did that. So yay, they love women. They did childcare. That's one thing in 8 years of governing that's concrete in terms of support for women. I cannot name another thing.
Yeah, for me, it's, I kind of feel this frustration on a daily basis when we see, I mean, if it wasn't even what was it, a month ago, maybe now, where on Instagram, I had an ad pop up, a targeted ad from TELUS trying to market me this like necklace, a safety alarm necklace that has some kind of, fancy design on it to make it, more chic. But essentially it was a panic button that I could wear around my neck and then, trigger it if I was ever, in an uncomfortable or dangerous situation. And it's like, well, instead of me living in a world where you want to give me and all other women or any other vulnerable or marginalized person, either a panic button necklace or, bear spray or, having to hold my phone, giving me self-defense lessons and self-defense.
Or holding your keys in your hands.
Exactly. Through my knuckles when I walk to my car or, making sure that I lock my doors right away. How about we fix the circumstances so that I don't have to do that, so that we don't have to do that? I guess it's just easier to give me the panic button necklace than to actually address these really systemic issues. But I don't see, to me, that that's where the change has to come from. Yep. It's not handing out, every time a baby girl is born, oh, hey, in 10 years or 15 years, you're going to need this panic alarm necklace. It's that we're taking concrete actions to make sure that, men and the world understand what is acceptable behavior and what isn't, and that these are the consequences of it. And it's not your fault just because you were born a girl.
Well, and I think it's about changing the way that men think it's appropriate to speak and react. And, obviously, men are victims of sexual violence as well. This is not just women's issue, but for example, over the last week, Andrew Tate has been the main character on Twitter. Andrew Tate is a raging misogynist. He is, a rape apologist, if not actually a rapist. He has been charged or will be charged with human trafficking as related to sexual violence against women. And when you see some of the responses to him, even the interaction between him and Greta Thunberg, I always mispronounce her last name. Someone said, why don't you guys just bang and get it over with? She's 19 years old. He's in his 40s. But there were all these people just thinking that was funny and that was appropriate and that kind of culture. And granted, Twitter is a very microcosm example, but I think when you look at a lot of issues around sexual violence and domestic violence, it's a lot of men who don't know how to call each other out and call each other in. And when we talk about toxic masculinity, part of that is also the ability to say to your friend, hey, buddy, that's not okay. And what you're saying to that woman is not okay. And the way you're acting is not okay. And that doesn't mean demonizing him or canceling him or whatever else, garbage that the right tries to push at you when you have these conversations. It's about trying to normalize healthy male conversations around what's appropriate and what's not. And that, I think, is the biggest issue when we talk about this, because a lot of it gets, like you said, it gets downloaded onto us. and our responsibility to protect ourselves. Like, don't go out at night, don't wear headphones, don't do this, instead of teaching men how they should really work and police each other in terms of their own behavior.
I completely agree. You know, and that conversation, like, these are the things that I wish were funded and talked about by, you know, even Justin Trudeau. Like, why can't I would love for him, for example, to host a public conversation on toxic masculinity.
Yep.
Like, you know, like low stakes, you're really going to hit it off politically with people who support you already. Meanwhile, you're driving a conversation around something, especially and to add on the multitude of layers that we see in this toxic culture of hate against him personally and the Liberal government in a post trucker convoy world.
Yeah, but like, even sorry to interrupt you, but like, I would love to see that kind of a conversation hosted by a conservative too, because
100%,
you know, and that's where I feel like sometimes, like, so yesterday, so for everybody, this conversation is happening on December 30th. So on December 29th, Erin O'Toole wrote an op-ed calling out the Trudeau flags and all that garbage stuff. And I mean, I wish that Erin O'Toole had actually shown up in the last election. That would have been nice to see. And that kind of level of sort of clarity on what is okay and what is not okay. But we need more of that. We need more people, because if Trudeau, and yeah, it would be great if he talked about that too, but he's only going to probably preach to the converted. There's not going to be a lot of people. And I mean, you and I both know a lot of people on the conservative right. Not a lot of the dudes that we know are probably going to be like, well, you know, I'm going to listen to Justin Trudeau on this particular topic. But I think that
the thoughtful, the
thoughtful ones, like, they will take it. It's not like they won't listen to it, but I think that conservative men speaking to other conservative men in that language would be significantly more impactful.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Which is why it was so meaningful that O'Toole wrote that op-ed. Like, I don't know where that came from and why he did it, but I'm glad.
You can go back. I don't know how many episodes ago I've talked about it multiple times, but I firmly believe that if Erin O'Toole had been let to be Erin O'Toole during that campaign, and they, like, the machine of conservative politics tried to get him to be something else, I honestly feel like he would have been a progressive conservative leader who maybe still wouldn't have won that election, but could have in the future. But obviously 2022 has eaten him, chewed him up, and spit him out. But I think this is actually the kind of stuff, these are the kinds of thoughtful conversations that Canadians actually want to see from conservatives, and just from people in general. So you're completely right. I think that conversation, I mean, it can't just be from, you know, from a progressive person or from a left-leaning person. It has to come from people on the right as well, in order for some people to be receptive of that message. But,
well, and the other thing is,
but again, these conversations aren't even happening, right?
No.
That's
But I think what it is in part is, so there's a lot of conservatives who have been very supportive. So going back to my article, one of the things that a lot of the athletes have asked for who are testifying before the Studs Women Committee on Women in Sports is a national inquiry. And that has been very supported by a couple very high profile conservative MPs, including Karen, oh my God, I'm going to butcher her last name, Vecchio.
You're looking for me. You're looking at me for help, but I'm failing you. I'm sorry.
But she's someone who's been highly supportive of them. There's been a couple of conservative MPs who've been incredibly supportive. And I think that as soon as you kind of have some of those names attached, people are like, you know, on the left to the Liberal side of things, because the Bloc has also been very supportive of an inquiry. And I don't understand why these things have to continue to be put on party lines. And today, Christy Duncan put out, who used to be the Minister of Sports, put out an editorial in the Globe and Mail calling for a national inquiry, which is going against the current Liberal government's position. And I would like to see more of that, and more government officials being willing to take a moral stand on these things and not a partisan position.
Yeah.
And, and like, I know that Twitter is what it is, but when you criticize Justin Trudeau on Twitter, you get like this immediate response from Liberal Twitter, which is like, well, he's great, he's perfect. You are not doing him any favors by continually allowing him this space where he can make mistakes and he doesn't get called out on it. That doesn't make him a better prime minister, and it certainly doesn't make our country stronger every time that he fucks up.
It's okay.
Screws up and you don't call him to account. And this is one of those examples. Like, they should have an inquiry into sports in general and create a more protective structure for athletes, especially young underage athletes in sports.
Yeah.
To ensure that this isn't happening.
Well, so I do believe so. It's the government has created what's called a new Office of Sport Integrity Commissioner. And that all of these athletic bodies have until, I can't remember when, it actually might be coming up, but they all have to join. So like Hockey Canada, Gymnastics Canada, like all of Golf Canada, you name, fill in the blank sport Canada. They all have to join on. And it'll be an independent complaint investigator for people. So I understand the demand for an inquiry, but I feel like one of the recommendations that would come from an inquiry would be something like the creation of a sport integrity commissioner. And so, not to say that there wouldn't be other valuable recommendations that would come out, obviously also shining a very, large spotlight on the voices of victims. But you know what I mean? Like, have they already kind of done something to address this? It's just that they have to give these organizations time to become a part of it. They can do it by choice now, or they can wait until the deadline approaches and then they'll just, be signed on immediately. They don't have a choice in opting out.
I would argue that I can understand why victims do not feel particularly comforted by that, because Hockey Canada, as an example, was, they have a responsibility, fiduciary responsibility, just like any other arm's length organization, to report up to the minister every year in what they're spending, what goes out, what comes in, what they're doing. So much like you would with an organization like this. And for years, they were giving out hush money to survivors to keep them silent, and nobody knew what was going on. And the ministry didn't know, ministry staff didn't know, it was kept silent. So I think that one of the things about the inquiry, and in addition to the inquiry, the other thing that survivors are requesting is for there to be an amendment to the criminal code that when you are complicit in an act of sexual assault, that you will be called to account for that, because complicity is one of the biggest issues that we see in a lot of these things. I mean, even, ranging from some of the issues in football in the United States with Gary Sandusky, the coach who was found to have molested like hundreds of boys. And when you read the accounts, there are people who saw something and just didn't want to get involved and say anything. And they saw him in showers with underage children and didn't say anything. So what the survivors are asking within this broader inquiry is a significant more level of accountability, because when you are held to account, or you will be held to account, you might actually say more. Mm-hmm. And so I can see why when you have this office, this independent office, that's also expecting that people will refer cases there.
Yes.
Yes. And as we know in politics, another example, oftentimes cases don't even get to the point where they're referred to an independent investigator. And when they are, and Alberta is another example of this, when Ariella Kimmel came forward about sexual harassment and abuse within the Alberta legislature, She still hasn't seen the report that came out as a result of that. Nobody has. It's never been made public. And who knows what it even says, and who knows what the government did as a result of it.
Well, and the person involved in that case is now back in cabinet.
Yeah, he is.
So, yeah, no, it's all kind of bad and all very problematic. And, I just like, we can have all the inquiries and the offices and the people but like, until the culture changes and accountability is, the name of the game in every area of every institution. And this, culture of secrecy and cover-ups is a thing of the past. I just, maybe I'm just too pessimistic about it. It leaves me feeling like, sometimes I feel like what's going to change and how long will it take?
Yeah. And I think it's also because it all comes back to this inability that we have to call out our own and call out people that we like. I remember an NDP person that I knew. There was a case, I think it was in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, I can't remember, where an NDP MLA or MP, I think it was an MLA, there was some sort of issue around sexual harassment. And I was talking to this girl that I knew who was very, 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 very active in the Me Too movement, very active on the old. And this was a buddy of hers. And she said to me, like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to feel. Like, this is my friend. And like, she looked like she was going to cry. She was so upset, but not because she didn't think he did it, because he was her friend. And I think until we kind of get to a point where we can say, like, you can care about and love and be friends with someone who is capable of these things, we all can be. It doesn't, like, until you're at that point where you can accept that and you can respond as consistently to the people in your life that you respect, like whether it's a politician or a movie star or a singer or whoever it is, as you would if it was someone you don't like, then that, like, until we get to that point, we're never going to be able to address these issues. Because even, this is a little off topic, but I made a tweet the other day about Alexander Ovechkin. So Alexander Ovechkin is now the number 3 scorer of all time. He's a brilliant athlete. He's also like an unapologetic Putin supporter. His Instagram photo is like him with his arm around Vladimir Putin. And so I tweeted, like, don't celebrate this guy. This guy sucks. Because he does. Because he
can score goals, but he's also besties with a murderous, genocidal regime leader.
Yeah. And it's not that he's just silent about it, because some Russian athletes, I can understand why they aren't saying anything. He is actively like, this is my guy. Like, he started like Team Putin. Like, anyway, the responses that I got were bananas. And it's just one example of how a lot of these people in my mentions are probably the same people telling Colin Kaepernick to like shut up and dribble, or, all these things, because it depends on how you align politically. And it shouldn't. These kind of things need to be called out regardless of who they are, regardless of the situation. And one of the more disappointing things around the Hockey Canada scandal is how few high-profile hockey players have said anything, especially people like Sidney Crosby, who are, Canadian icons, quote unquote, and probably knows people involved in that because of the timing. He hasn't said shit. Like, none of them have. And even Connor McDavid, all these people, they haven't said anything. And that is extremely disappointing. And I feel like that's teaching young men getting involved in hockey that you just shut your mouth and play.
Yeah. My call to action for anyone would be, like, if you know something, I can understand you're concerned about the risk to your own reputation and, the consequences and fallout from that. But you need to do the right thing. And yeah, it's just, yeah, it's a lot to unpack, and it's a lot And people have a responsibility, especially people in positions of power and privilege, because you will be somewhat insulated to some degree compared to others. So, you know, you like do the right thing.
Well, and I think a lot about there's this story that when the Harvey Weinstein thing came out, when Gwyneth Paltrow eventually spoke out about her experiences, she tells this story about how he had been harassing her and kind of pushing her on things. And this was when she was dating Brad Pitt. So like 1997, like epic levels of hot Hollywood couple. And Brad Pitt went to a party and Harvey Weinstein was there and he pushed him against like the wall with his hand on his throat and said, like, basically, don't screw with my girlfriend ever again. And Harvey Weinstein never fucked with her again because he saw Brad Pitt as his equal. He didn't see Gwyneth Paltrow as his equal. He didn't see a lot of the women that he hurt as his equal, but he had a guy come up to him who he saw as someone who either was his, well, I mean, let's all be honest, Brad Pitt in 1997 was significantly more important than Harvey Weinstein. And he stopped. And I think that's where we need to really talk about this stuff, is like how you need to call each other out. And that's a perfect example of the impact it can have. And if somebody like Connor McDavid, like Sidney Crosby came forward and had the guts that people like Sheldon Kennedy before them have had to talk about the toxicity of the environment, it would do a lot of good.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's how much time it will take if it ever happens. But those are the kinds of significant, you know, pivotal, those are the moments that shift conversations and shift cultures. And hockey culture obviously still needs that to happen, as do so many others. So yeah, I mean, thank you for writing about this in the line, because I definitely think it's a conversation. It's easy, I think, for, especially given our, you know, our need for, you know, new things to come into our attention, and like a really rapid media cycle. And these stories just continue to deserve our attention and our awareness. So thank you for pushing it out again. And, you know, this is something that we need to keep talking about into 2023.
Well, and I think the other thing I would just say in terms of call to action for the people listening to this podcast is that, like, if these issues matter to you, tell your MP that they matter to you.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to issues around sexual violence and domestic violence, those are often not door knocking issues. Those are not things people bring up at the doors. And because they aren't things that people bring up at the doors, politicians don't prioritize them.
Yes.
So if you call your MP or you call your MLA and you say, this is something that matters to me and this is something that I want addressed, that is going to make sure that it gets into the platform, because we're going into an election in 2023 in Alberta. You want to see domestic and sexual violence in the platform for both parties, call your MLA and tell them that this matters to you.
And ask your candidates, right? And door knock when someone knocks on your door.
Yeah, 100%. And like, you know, God knows when we'll have a next federal election. Hopefully not for a while, because we've had so many. But when we do have a next one, that's the other thing. But like, just make sure that your elected officials know that this matters to you.
Yeah, you're definitely right. There has to be, like, when there's the weight will shift when enough people are talking about this and asking people to do something about it. Because that is what moves the needle sometimes is, you know, how much people talk about these things and how much they, you know, care about it enough to talk to their politicians about it. And then we see change.
Yeah. And that's the only way oftentimes that anything happens on these issues, because it is like when you are struggling to pay rent or buy your groceries or your heating bill or whatever it is, like obviously these things kind of fall to the wayside in terms of what matters to you in your day-to-day priority. Yeah. But if you could take a second to include that within the conversation, then the people who are elected to represent us will also do the same.
Yeah, that's a very valuable point. So, well, thank you for joining me, Kristin, and for having this conversation. It's yeah, I mean, I'm not going to stop talking about this, and I know that you're not going to either. So,
No.
let's get more people talking about this going into 2023, because it can be the economy and in terms of what we care about. It doesn't have to be
absolutely.
just one or the other.
Excellent.
Thanks
for
Kristin.
having me.
Yeah, no, thanks.